Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. USA men's soccer returns to Seattle for a second stop right after the 4th of July. As Seattle basks in the joy of an international gathering, how do sports intersect with our city's politics and our national identity in the current political moment? We'll hear from the director of the UW Global Sport Lab in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. Seattle's final World Cup match is today, and it's a big one. Team USA versus Belgium in a round of 16 knockout match. It all begins at 5 p.m., so you know the drill. Expect heavy traffic and packed transit during the afternoon commute. Doors open at Lumen Field at 2 o'clock. Washington Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal has introduced a bill that would essentially take Seattle's Fresh Bucks program and bring it to the rest of the country. The Seattle Democrats' proposal would give low-income families $60 a month to spend on fresh produce. Jayapal says her bill is modeled on Seattle's program, which serves about 17,000 households. And the AI company Anthropic is expanding in South Lake Union. Puget Sound Business Journal reports the company signed a lease for office space that exceeds 100,000 square feet. Recently, Bellevue has benefited the most from AI expansion in the region from several companies, including OpenAI. But according to the Business Journal, office space is actually cheaper in downtown Seattle compared to Bellevue. Anthropic hasn't said how many employees will fill the new space in South Lake Union, but the company currently has nearly 100 open roles in Seattle. We're back with more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. USA men's soccer is back in Seattle for the second time in just a few weeks for a win-or-go-home match against Belgium. And the excitement is palpable when they come to town. Last month's match against Australia broke records for attendance at the waterfront and for public transit use. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance are not expected to attend the match, but Seattle will still be in the spotlight across the country and the world for another moment in American sports history. UW Global Sport Lab Director Ron Crable is here to talk about how international sporting events tap into our patriotism. Ron, really appreciate you being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
There are some sports fans who don't like to include politics in their sports discussions. Some people use sports as an escape from politics, but it feels slightly inevitable that politics are linked to the World Cup. How are sports political?
I think it's one of the driving questions of the role of sports in our society. And so I think one way to think about it is that sports is inevitably political, not in a partisan sense. It certainly can be political in a partisan sense. But if we think about politics as the way that we relate to each other, that we choose to live together, sort of the agreements we make with each other, then it's inevitable that anything that has meaning to us in our daily lives, that we invest money in, that we structure our schedule around, that we tie our identity to, all of which we certainly do with sports, will have political elements. And so I think it's inevitable. And I think that's becoming more clear to people maybe than it might have in the past. Certainly with this World Cup, because of all its political ramifications, with Iran traveling to the United States in the midst of a conflict, with Infantino awarding Trump the FIFA World Peace Prize, quite explicitly political in a way that oftentimes sporting events attempt to avoid.
It feels like we're in a whirlwind of patriotism right now. Team USA and a World Cup played on American soil, America's 250th anniversary, and all the things that come with that. How do international sports tap into our patriotic tendencies?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things about international sports, particularly moments like the Olympics, the FIFA World Cup, other World Cups, the Rugby World Cup, Cricket World Cup, those sorts of things, because they're organized as nation against nation, it's sort of inevitable that it becomes tied to nationalism. Sports is often connected to identity and how we see ourselves in the world and our place in the world. So, lots of other levels of sports, professional sports in the United States, club sports, that sort of thing, also have those elements of identity. When you make the tournament organized around nation versus nation, then it becomes sort of naturally a moment for questions of patriotism. I also think what we mean by patriotism is a question, right? We tend to think of patriotism in one form, but I think part of what we're seeing with this World Cup is people trying to redefine their vision of the nation, their imagination of what it means to even be patriotic. And so I don't think it's a given what that means, but it is a given that it will be a site in which people sort of talk about it and sort of struggle over it.
That's really interesting. Say more about that.
One way to think about what the World Cup does is it becomes a struggle for different visions of what the nation is and what the nation can be. I think we also saw that with the most recent Winter Olympics, where several of the US athletes were sort of challenged on, do you support the current government? Do you not support the current government? And a lot of those athletes were trying to walk a line between saying, I am proud of my country as I imagine my country to be, and that country is inclusive, or, trying to push back against the rhetoric of America first that was coming from the government, and yet still sort of retain some space for a sense of patriotism of what America is or could be. And I think you see that with how people are responding to the US men's national team right now as well.
It's hard to forget just a few months ago that image of Kash Patel, the FBI director, celebrating with the U.S. men's hockey team after their gold medal at the Winter Olympics. How are our national teams tied to our national identity?
Historian Eric Hobsbawm has a favorite quote of mine where he says the imagined community of millions, meaning the nation, is better understood as 11 named people on the field. The gist of that is this idea that, you imagine the nation, which is a very abstract concept, right? It's much easier to understand that if you can project that into a specific team, specific people who you can then cheer for or root for against other nations or as representing certain things. So I think it's really common for the national team to be seen as representatives of this larger concept of the nation or the nation state. But I think that also means that's always a site of contestation over what that means, what the nation state means. So, one side might say, this is our side, right or wrong. I'll root for them no matter what. I hope they destroy everyone else around. But someone else might say, I cheer for this team to be good sports, to sort of participate in this event in a way that connects the world, that shows a side that plays with honor, win or lose. So I think there are different ways of imagining what the nation means, and then that gets projected onto the national team by people all across the political spectrum.
It's been really interesting to see how Seattle has embraced the World Cup. The chants of USA, USA almost feel a little out of place here in some ways. This is a very left-leaning city. Can people separate their feelings on American politics and their love of Team USA or the USA in general? What are we seeing there?
I mean, I think on one level, it might be a separation. It might be sort of saying, I'm going to put this on hold. I'm going to suspend this for a moment. I might not like everything my government is doing, but it feels really empowering or cathartic to cheer for the United States to sort of join in that kind of moment. I also think sometimes it's not necessarily about separating, but actually about holding that tension in place, being able to sort of say, I can recognize that what my government is doing is not what I want them to be doing, but I can still appreciate the ways that a moment like the US success in the national team can bring people together in spite of differences or across differences. And then I think with the World Cup, and especially here in Seattle, you also see a moment of different nations coming to Seattle and connecting people to people, not government to government, but being able to connect as fans in the stands, fans in the streets, and sort of enjoy the chance just to connect as human beings. I think it's very hard to hate someone who you're talking to one-on-one in sort of a warm conversation. We know it's not impossible, but I think it's harder, as opposed to sort of an imaginary other that is represented by a government that we might be at war with.
It's interesting because we're also in sort of a joy bubble right now. It seems, small towns like Lawrence, Kansas are celebrating countries from the other side of the world. People are celebrating in the streets. I cannot believe the conviviality going on the light rail trains in the morning, to be honest. Some people on social media are calling this the great international sleepover. How can sports be a uniting factor in a turbulent political time?
I think it's exactly what you're seeing and what you're describing. I think at its best, sports becomes a way to connect one-on-one or in smaller groups in people to people diplomacy is what it would often be called. At its best, sports is a chance to come together in friendly competition and recognize our commonality rather than our differences. But I think the key there is to recognize that people have to engage in that conviviality intentionally. It's not a given. I think one of the mistakes people often make is this idea that sports unites people or sports brings people together just intrinsically. And we know that sports can also drive people apart and can cause conflict and violence. But I do think at its best, sports is a venue for people to connect across difference who might not have a chance to connect otherwise and build those kinds of relationships that might be impossible to build on larger diplomatic or governmental levels.
Team USA hasn't made it past the round of 16 since 2002. What does it mean that Seattle specifically could be at the site of a big moment in American sports history?
I mean, I think it's interesting to think about Seattle as a big sports town, which I think it has been for a long time. And it certainly has been a soccer town for a long time. We in Seattle have known that for a long time. I do think on a national scale and certainly on a global scale, that's not as well known. And I think part of what's happening is the way Seattle is showing out for the World Cup and the sort of wonderful vibe that's built around a lot of the tournament. I think the fact that our stadium is right downtown, connected to the downtown core, so that people are seeing the city as part of the character of the games in a way that we aren't seeing in most of the games, I think, actually means that Seattle is having a moment and sort of getting put on the national and especially the international sporting map in a different way. I do think that soccer specifically, Seattle has been a hotbed for a long, long time. And I think you're seeing the harvest of that, if you will. I think you're seeing the results of a lot of hard work by a lot of people for a very long time to embrace the sport, to promote the sport. This is a moment where people are sort of seeing that come to fruition.
Team USA played here in Seattle, but so did Iran, played in a group stage match here. Their current situation is directly influenced by American politics. How do foreign visitors for the World Cup or supporters of other national teams leverage the games being played here in America?
Yeah, I think we've seen, many of the memes, a lot of the sort of buzz around the World Cup has been about the surprise of foreign visitors at the positivity of the reception they've received and even their appreciation of like different elements of American culture. And I think those are really heartwarming stories. I think it's not a surprise that Americans in particular have sort of loved to hear those stories. And I think it does reflect back to Americans a sense of like, yeah, there's a reason we love parts of our culture and these are those parts of that culture, and it's sort of that connection. I do think it's really important in the midst of that to keep in mind who's able to travel because of the visa bans on some countries, because of the sort of safety questions for some folks, the racialization of travel in the United States right now. I think it's important to keep that in mind as we sort of celebrate those connections as well.
Seattle as a city has drawn the ire of some on the political spectrum. President Trump's commented on Seattle multiple times as a place he sees as unsafe. How has Seattle set itself apart from America as a whole during this World Cup?
What people have seen of Seattle in this World Cup compared to other host cities in the United States is that sense of a long-standing soccer tradition that's deeply embedded in the culture and also the political culture. I think there's something about soccer that actually, in a United States context, fits Seattle politics very well. In most of the rest of the world, soccer is seen as often like the dominant sport in the society. And so it sort of tends to be aligned with the dominant sort of forces in society in a lot of different ways. In the United States, because soccer has been relatively marginalized compared to what people often would think of as more American sports, baseball, basketball, American football. It actually means that soccer has built a fan culture that is particularly oriented towards more international worldviews, more cosmopolitan viewpoints. It's largely been driven in the United States by immigrant communities and immigrant communities connecting both with others from the same countries of origin, but also with other immigrants. And so it gives soccer a very different sort of valence in the United States than it has in many other places. And I think that aligns really well with how Seattle imagines itself as a cosmopolitan international city. And so I think all of those have aligned in a way that gives Seattle an opportunity to put that face forward to the rest of the world.
Was any of this surprising to you, that things have been going so well?
I think it is. I think what I would say is I knew the potential was there. And I've seen elements of this at other World Cups that I've attended. Up to 2 or 3 weeks before the tournament started, it didn't seem like that vibe was sort of attaching itself to the city. I wasn't sure the city was going to sort of embrace it as a whole. I mean, I was sure that soccer fans would. I already knew soccer fans were already embracing it, but I wasn't sure that the city as a whole would sort of take it up and be excited about it. And I think that's what we've seen.
It seems like we needed this a little bit.
I think there's a pretty strong sense of this was a moment of coming together that people were really seeking in the midst of a very divisive politics and a time that can feel very, very difficult, particularly in places like Seattle when there's such a disjuncture between the national politics and the local or state politics. And so I do think there's a way in which people feel an almost catharsis or a relief at being able to connect and being able to sort of celebrate positive elements of what it means to be American or what it means to be a Seattleite in this moment. And I think that's been noticeable in how people have responded.
Ron Crable is a professor of mass media, politics, and sociology at UW-Bothell and the head of the UW Global Sport Lab. Ron, really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks.
It was a pleasure talking. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
As Team USA returns and America celebrates 250 years, we asked for your voicemails about patriotism in Seattle. Here are some of your thoughtful responses.
While I think there are many wonderful things about being an American, patriotism in this country seems to come wrapped up in a blindly held belief of American exceptionalism. If I were going to wave a flag, it would more likely have a peace symbol or United Nations emblem on it.
I think it's about political attachment to liberal norms and institutions, things that help us live in a functioning multicultural society, and not so much about national identity or culture. So I might be a constitutional patriot.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And all means all of us. It's that simple. The American agenda includes all of us, no exceptions. That's the American dream, always just out of reach and yet always seeming closer to being true.
Thanks to those who submitted, and thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Take a moment to rate and review the show in your podcast app or share this episode with a friend. Today's episode was produced by Vaughn Jones. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. Talk to you tonight for Evening Headlines.